Hi, I'm Todd Kelly from Kelly Racing. You may have seen on Instagram and Facebook that we've actually opened up to all of you guys what questions you'd like answered with the race team, and we've always tried to be really open and show as much behind the scenes stuff as we possibly can through the Mustang build and through our road trip and our racing in general. So this is the next step now when you can actually come directly to myself and some of the other crew in the race team and ask some specific questions. So it's been about 6-7 weeks now since we've returned home from our massive road trip this year. We had 2 weeks off for all the crew to start with, just to let everyone recover and spend some time with their families, which was a really good thing after being away for 106 days. Since we've been back, we've actually achieved quite a lot. So I really wanted to leave these cars intact, because we normally get back from a race meeting and they get stripped down and hardly even resemble a race car. So we've left the bodies all intact, but everything's been stripped out. So you can see the engines are now out of the cars. There's really nothing in here under the bonnet. Radiators are out. All the suspension is out, so front uprights, anti-roll bar systems, rear suspension, all the gearboxes are out, and the crew out the back have really been bombarded with basically a whole season's worth of servicing to do. So all the gearboxes are stripped down, dampers are all, and springs are all being serviced and sent away, all the suspension. So the guys have knocked a really big hole in that. And while these cars are sitting here with the crew not being able to do a huge amount to them, we've tried to clear a few other jobs in preparation for next year. So this is pretty cool. This car only got finished yesterday. So this is my car as it was raced just before I retired. So this is exactly how it was run. Everything in the cockpit's the same, engine's the same, the gearbox and the actual setup, springs and dampers and everything is what I finished off in a Newcastle. So that's sitting there ready to do. I'm not sure what we're going to do with that yet. We'll have to wait and see, but it's ready to go if we decide to take it for a burn. This is Michael Caruso's old car, which then became Simona's car, so it finished off as the Harvey Norman car. So the crew this was stripped back to a complete bare shell, and it's having a full ground up rebuild, and it'll go back together. You can see all the arms, everything's brand new in this car. So we'll either run that in Super 2 next year, or we may put it up for sale. But the main thing is just getting the car completed instead of lying all over the place in bits. So we've cleared all of these kinds of jobs, and prior to Christmas we'll jump back on the actual supercars and have a really good crack at getting everything ready for next year, with all of these kind of jobs completely off our table so we can focus on the championship. So let's sit down and answer a few of your questions. After what I went through, in particular trying to drive a race car as well as being a team owner and quite hands-on in that role, in the last 3 or 4 years we all really put quite a lot of effort into making sure Rick could get the most out of himself without any unnecessary distractions. So we've got an amazing group of people here, plenty of staff to take on all of the roles that we require in the team. So we really made sure that Rick was just a driver for the last 3 or 4 years and could focus on that and not be disadvantaged in any way to all of his competitors. So I think that worked really well. I haven't even, to be honest, sat down and had a good chat with Rick about what he wants to do from here, but I know myself, when I finish driving, you know, it builds up to a massive peak and quite an emotional one to finish off with, and to have a discussion about what you're going to do next or what your involvement might be isn't something that you need to kind of blaze in there and think about without just taking time to absorb what's just happened. And I know it took me, you know, to really get my head around not being a driver was nearly a 1.5 year process to be content with what I'd done and move on. So, you know, the team's going really well as it is, and it'd be great if Rick can complement that anyway, or if he just wants to float in and out as a friend, that's cool too. But he's, you know, had a really good, long, successful career as a driver, and like I said, you need to kind of just let that thing sort itself out and work out where you want to be. We've got plenty of other things going on around the race team which Rick's got a lot of interest in as well. So, and in the end, as brothers, you know, Rick's a co-owner of the race team in Kelly Racing, so he certainly won't be dropping off the face of the earth. I know he'd like to jump in his caravan, and even though he spent 6 months in it on the road, he wants to do that kind of thing as well. But yeah, he'll be a part of the team for sure. The best thing about being on the road with the team was I got to spend 106 days of quality time with the crew, which was fun. But for me, just being able to get out on the road, and I did a few Ks behind the wheel of the coach, ran 15,400, but to see all of Australia and be able to do that as part of your job was really a fantastic experience for me. I tried to make the most of it, pulling up in creek beds and having a cook up here and there on the side of the road for the crew, and just to be able to see Australia and show the team what's actually outside of the city was probably my highlight. There's a lot of challenges going from a driver to a team owner, and that happened about halfway through my career. So 10 years driving with Kmart Racing and the Holden Racing team as a factory driver, and then 1 year with Perkins as a professional driver, and then biting the bullet and starting this operation up was a pretty big step. So to try and manage a place this big with 4 cars and 60 odd staff while driving was quite a challenge. But a lot of people around me through that period really made that as good as it could possibly be. But the second stage of that was hopping out of the car and then being the team owner that wasn't driving and standing in the garage while the cars were on track trying to work out what it is I should be doing was quite challenging as well. But the biggest thing is just having all the right people around us right through that whole period, and people that are really good at their jobs and can take the load off me and also Rick at times when we need to focus on what we're doing as drivers. My last race at Newcastle was certainly emotional. That's probably the not the most emotional I've been in the car, almost the most emotional I've ever been. I had my wife Christy and my children Mason and Alex there for the weekend, and just doing a parade lap with those guys in the back of the ute with me, and having fans shout things out and wave. It was a pretty special day. And then they completely rewrapped my car on the Saturday night and did a special livery for the farewell, and that just blew me away. Looking at the photos that we have around the traps every now and then of that day is still probably the highlight of my whole career, is how the whole thing ended. Building the Mustang engines on the road was quite a big deal. I'm actually not an engine builder. A lot of you probably know that. I've built some engines for the race boats and hot rods and bits and pieces. I've actually got a little engine room at home and at one of our other factories. So I've tinkered around a lot with those engines, but to build one of these engines from scratch is one thing, but the importance of building one of these engines for Bathurst or any supercar round versus something of my own is a big deal. And on top of that, we only had 2 days to build a complete engine in a lot of the cases, as well as half rebuilding the engines on the road when we had a few issues with our valve guides. So looking back at that, I still can't believe what we actually achieved, and the cars kept running through the whole period. But the phone bill was pretty heavy through that time, because I was on the phone to Sean in particular in the engine shop pretty much constantly, even through the builds, and it was almost as if I was just turning the spanners and things while Sean was building the engine a few thousand k's away. So that's probably one of the real highlights of this whole championship, is what went on behind the scenes that we tried to show as much of as possible. And from the outside, if you just watch the races on the TV, you probably wouldn't know, and it didn't really look any different to how the team operated. Yeah, there was a lot of work going on in the background. My most exciting thing as a team owner, there's a few, and I take a lot of enjoyment out of not just the results but our achievements in general. One thing is when we actually finished building the Nissan Altima. That was 14 months of a huge amount of work, over 25,000 hours of design and production to end up with a race car. So to start that car up for the very first time and bring all of that work to life, to me was a huge achievement. And then the success that car's had in supercars and in Super 2 with its championships has been really impressive. And again, doing something as crazy as trying to go from Nissan to Ford in the matter of 3 months and designing an engine, that's been one of the big highlights for me and what we've achieved as a team as well. A big part of what we do here at Kelly Racing is try and bring young people into our sport, whether that be drivers, engineers, data people or mechanics, And we've been very fortunate to have had a very long and successful relationship with Kangan, which have a proper motorsport program, and we actually have a lot of apprentices here at any one time that are working within our team. And as it's turned out over the years, it's been so successful that a lot of those apprentices have ended up as mechanics on the car in a number 2 role, and then even in a number 1 role, all through our team here, and then have eventually grown into other roles, and even filtered into other teams in the category. So it's a really good program, hard to get into if you've got no experience, but a perfect pathway if you've got no experience to go to Kangan, get all of the courses done there, and then get introduced into a race team from them. I actually got asked not long ago whether I'd ever jump back behind the wheel of a supercar since I'd retired, and I said no. But I actually forgot we did an aero test after the Newcastle round, so I spent 5 or so days driving flat out up and down a runway on the rev limiter at Temora, which is when actually the Mustang aero test was done. So I did that. It was actually I think it was in Rick's car after Newcastle, and since that day I've not actually hopped back in a supercar and driven it round, which has been tough. It's almost like quitting smoking or something, especially when you walk past these cars 10 times a day here at the workshop and hear the engines rev up, and there's always that temptation to jump back in for the enduros, which I've managed to not do, which is actually one of the other questions, so I may as well answer that now. But I really would have loved to have hopped back in as an enduro driver. It's obviously a natural progression from a full-time driver to then doing a handful of years in the enduros, but as it's turned out, there's just so much workload as a team owner that there's no way I could commit to doing that job justice and doing it properly, and lucky I made that decision, because as it's turned out this year, I was building engines and in the door, tuning up the maps through the race, and there's no way with the amount of people we had on the road that I could have even thought about driving a car again. So I do miss it, and yeah, but I did have a pretty good run of 20 years or so driving these cars around. We've got a few ski race boats that we've played around with over the years. They started off with a 6-litre version of a supercar engine in them. Then we actually went to NASCAR engines for a little while, 6 litres, and then we built our last boat with a Nissan engine, but we made it a 5.2 litre engine to suit the class that we race in, and that was a really cool project. We did a little bit to the engine, but not a great deal from how it ran in the race car. So we revved to 7,500 in the car, and we wanted to target around 8,500 in the ski race boat. So we changed the cams a little bit, the inlet manifold a little, and the exhaust system, but the whole internals of the engine were the same as what we ran in the car. And that little 5.2 engine made about 725 horsepower, which was pretty handy. And they just sit at 8,500 revs for 30 or 40 minutes at a time, and it's been extremely reliable and a really successful boat engine. So we've actually got a few of those engines now that we're building as 6 litres, which we've never done before. So hopefully we can get that on the dyno soon and see how many horsepower she makes. I guess you could put a supercar engine in a street car. I've actually thought about it quite a few times, trust me. But there's a few things that are a little bit difficult. One, the expense of one of those engines is quite high. But the way they drive now with the tuning and the mapping and the ECU and the power curve of the engine, actually really nice engine to drive. So drivability wise, they'd be fine in a road car, but the electronics would be extremely expensive. And there's a few things like our dry sump system, which requires a 10 or so litre, 12 litre oil tank separate to the engine to house all the oil, and a few things like that would be quite hard to package just for a road car. And the way the engine works, like the seal that stops the oil going out the back of the crank on a road car, is completely different to a race car with a dry sump. So you'll notice if you look closely, a lot of race car, or pretty much every race car, has oil dripping out of the rear main seal in the garage and in the truck, which is just normal because the seal's designed to work at its optimum when the engine's running and it's under vacuum. So there's a few little things like that would make it a little bit annoying as a road car engine, but you could also try and work out how to convert the engine to a wet sump if you're just going to cruise around the streets. So we've got quite a few engines out the back. One day you might see one of them in a road car. So looking back, we actually achieved a fair bit of engine development on the road with different butterfly blades in the inlet manifold, and obviously the valve guide issue we had, which got upgraded. And then we did a few other little bits and pieces on the road, and actually re-homologated the engine, a lighter weight version right at the end. So even though we weren't here at the workshop, we actually did a huge amount of R&D and development while we were on the road. So now that we're back, I reckon 90% of what we're doing here and the guys in the engine shop are doing is just servicing all of the parts that we did use and working out all of our ordering and building to get through next year. So there's a little bit left to do in the engine development, but we're pretty much there now. Downsizing to 2 cars and making the decision to change over to Mustang, to me, was definitely worth the hard work. This year was a really tough one as we hit the road as soon as we finished the cars, and we're trying to pick up the pieces as we went along, and managed to get a few trophies out of this season in a pole position, which was fantastic. But for me, the hard work's really going to pay off at the start of next year with what we've done so far with the cars now and what we've learnt this year, and being able to go back to the tracks that we didn't go so well at this year, next year with a fresh approach. I'm really excited about it, and I'll hopefully get to the end of next year and be incredibly happy with the result that all of that effort's achieved for us. My wooden boat Fleetwood is actually sitting in my shed at home more as an ornament nowadays, as I haven't been able to get back on it and finish it. But it's been probably 17 years since I pulled the engine out of the boat and built up a supercar engine to put back in that boat. The engine's in the engine room in my shed at home, and the boat's sitting there without an engine. So hopefully if we get a little bit more time this Christmas where we're not building race cars, I can get back on and try and finish the boat. I certainly miss driving it. So we do have a new chassis completely built. It's just come off the jig in the fab shop, and in the next week or two the guys are going to get stuck into sanding it all back, de-rusting it and sealing it, and we hope to have that in the paint shop and painted before we shut down for Christmas, so it's sitting in here ready to start assembling for next year. We've actually done a lot of training camps over the years. There's only really been 1 or 2 years that we've not done training camps. We've been down the beach and done beach ones. We've been up in the mountains for 2 or 3 days, a little bit like the SAS program that's been on Channel 7 with some of the style camps we've done, and we've done quite a few up at our farm in Mildura. There's been a lot of stories that have come out of those training camps, but unfortunately what goes away on training camp stays there. I hadn't actually done any sort of mechanical course at all, but I've always been hands-on right from a young age of 10 years old, working on my own go-karts, and my very first Formula Ford actually rebuilt from ground up and learnt how to build the gearbox, and it's just carried on from that, and having an interest and passion in everything to do with cars is probably the best way to learn. From the information that the team owners have got on Gen 3, it sounds like it's coming together really well. There's some pretty big things that can be improved on these cars. As a car, these are the most amazing cars we could hope for as a supercar, but they're so good that it's made the racing probably not as good as what it should be. So too much downforce, all the things that make the cars faster and easier to drive has made the racing worse. So less downforce, then you can get away with a little bit less horsepower, and a cheaper engine is certainly a good thing for the category to be doing. Making it cheaper for us teams to run the cars is an important part of it as well, as things evolve in the future. So I think it'll be a pretty cool car. There's actually not a huge amount of information that has been signed off and come to the teams, but it's certainly all the things that I've tried to push for in my time as a team owner is looking like it's filtering into the new car, as well as the general feel of the category, so it's looking good. I don't reckon I've got a favourite. I like driving or flying anything. I initially thought the Mack truck, the B doubles, I love driving those trucks, and I thought, well, you can't say a Mack truck when you have the luxury and pleasure to fly a Pilatus PC12, and I love driving a race boat and even hopping on a front end loader or an excavator or a grader. Basically whatever it is, I'll enjoy driving it, but I can't pick a favourite. I think where we've arrived at with 2 cars, it's really been a long time coming. To run 4 cars is a really good situation to have for a team of this size, where we manufacture everything in-house. It's very good for running cars cost effectively, but running cars competitively and having the focus that's required to get the setups right, to get all the team working right, is not twice as hard with 4 cars. It's like 3 or 4 times as hard. So I've really found it so much easier to get all those performance things right and put the effort into the right areas with 2 cars that I don't think it's really on our agenda to go away from that, at least until we try and get some success with the cars that we've put so much effort into. I certainly do miss driving. As I said earlier, it's been hard not to jump back in a car, but we've actually got the old car sales car sitting there ready to run, and it'd be a shame to not put it on a racetrack. So we'll see in the next year, or it might be 2 years, if there's an opportunity to take it down to a track day and have a drive. I certainly love to do that, and even something as simple as putting my kids in the car and doing a few slow laps with them to show them what I used to do when they were younger. But yeah, I definitely will hop back in a car one day, but I don't think I'll be doing another Bathurst.